Hey, it's Soul with what I think is probably not just another Warcraft video. I plan on this being a multi-part series that covers the World of Warcraft and some of the challenges that it faces. I'm going to cover two areas that I feel are important to me, and they're good ones, by the way. But I also want to point out that the views that I express here are just a series of opinions from one fan with just one perspective, even if I end up using more inclusive words like we or our. I do still enjoy playing WoW after 14 years of having this subscription now with multiple accounts, but I feel that there are many areas of opportunity for WoW and for Blizzard to, quote, do better. And some of these areas include better communication of scheduling releases of content, or what people call time gating, and I think that could be cleaned up a bit. I also think that there are one too many raid difficulties, but I know that that's a more contentious issue because there are many different player camps that represent different views. The two issues that I want to identify in part one of this series, so I'm just going to be identifying problems in this video, are part of the pillars or the foundations of the World of Warcraft. So like quests are part of this foundation. So are raids and dungeons, and the fact that we have two opposing factions, and there are other things too. These are the foundations that very much define World of Warcraft's identity. So in that vein, the design of class progression throughout WoW's history is going to be one of the issues that I'm going to talk about, and the other is going to be all about the social and the grouping features that help support the World of Warcraft and its players. These are very broad and nuanced topics. It's complicated, so providing feedback and trying to identify issues and provide solutions, it's not going to be simple. So this feedback is going to be pretty focused just on these two key areas. And even then, I wouldn't call it comprehensive. I'm going to do my best to articulate the points, hence this being part one of the series. And before I start, I'll just remind you folks at home and elsewhere one more time that, well, this is obvious, I'm just a fan, a commentator, a player. I'm not a designer, but I am going to speak from the heart, and I think that's all the credibility that I deserve or need. Early class growth in the World of Warcraft was pretty straightforward. Leveling up made you eligible to learn new abilities and or talents. You went to a trainer, who are still there, to learn and upgrade said abilities and talents, and then you went on your way. Over time, more abilities were learned. The ranks grew higher, after you went back to your trainer to buy them at least. The talent trees grew deeper. The action bars became more and more filled. And two major shifts with class growth occurred. The more acute change being the move away from talent trees and towards specializations, which pigeonholed classes into more clearly defined roles and removing that particular level of class customization. I remember leveling through the Burning Crusade with this ridiculous combination of talents that included a Seal of the Crusader and Reckoning, for those who remember how that worked. Today, I would level as Protection or Retribution, and the only wiggle room is in my talent selection. The other shift is a bit more nuanced, but undeniably is the more, in my opinion, is the more damaging change, because Blizzard just can't go back and fix it. More recent expansions picked up a paradigm of featuring character growth systems like perks and artifacts and Azerite gear that work well enough in the present, but afterwards, these legacy systems are little more than a footnote in our character's career, and there isn't anything that helps to fill that gap. One day, many, many years from now, as we're leveling new characters, we're going to go through Warlords of Draenor and Legion and Battle for Azeroth and whatever expansion, and these kinds of systems, they don't apply during the leveling process anymore, which means there's the feeling of no growth at all. This is the basis for the common critique in WoW that classes have not grown since Warlords of Draenor, when an additional talent row was brought in at level 100. Like I said earlier, the perks came in and then the perks disappeared. The artifacts came in and then the artifacts deactivated. Azerite gear came in, and then Azerite gear is going to explode. I don't know. And then the process continues, apparently. It's an interesting observation, isn't it? That we can look back in hindsight and identify that our characters haven't had any internal growth at all. Instead, our character's power has been external. It's been borrowed. It leaves this period during the pre-patch of the new expansion, all the way up to like several months maybe into the first one, that our characters feel like they were depowered. Maybe this makes sense from a roleplay standpoint, as the champion loses access to this borrowed power, this artifact weapon, and then now they have to rise up and meet the new challenge. But it feels no less awkward. Because with the way that all this ties in together, in a world where the Blizzard mandate is gameplay first, it doesn't feel like the expectation is being met. As the gap between the character creation screen and endgame widens with every expansion, there's this unnecessary burden upon Blizzard to try smoothing out this growth into something that even remotely makes sense. With every shift, the leveling process is revisited. Abilities and talents and growth rates are shuffled around. Recently there was a stat squish with future squishes to come, and it's going to grow to be even more cumbersome as we approach the 8th, the 9th, and the 10th expansion, assuming we get there. Take Fire Mages for one example. During Legion, they possessed the artifact Fellow Malorn and its awesome abilities. Today though, if a new Fire Mage were to hit level 60, what talents do they have access to? Well, one of them is called Phoenix Flames, which happens to be the signature ability Fire Mages used in Legion. Retribution Paladins have access to the Wake of Ashes talent at level 60, and yet they weren't swinging around the Ashbringer at this time. The problem I'm identifying isn't about just improving the leveling experience, but also to identify the inconsistent growth of our characters. This feeling of growth feels compromised when we see this borrowed power that may or may not be just arbitrarily put into a talent row somewhere. It disturbs the perception of our characters from both a roleplay and a gameplay perspective. I'm asserting here that character progression shouldn't merely be a gimmick that we know isn't going to stick around. I'd rather see this very valuable development time go into creating a solid system that isn't just fun and engaging, but is something that is built into this whole long-term vision of the World of Warcraft, and not just for 2 years only to be discarded. I'm going to talk about this in a later video, but what I would love to see is a more consistent approach to the growth of our classes, because I do honestly believe that there is a point where there isn't a need to be constantly introduced into these brand new abilities. However, I can envision a future of World of Warcraft where my abilities can grow to be more sophisticated, or they can evolve or synergize with other abilities in different ways as the career of my character goes on. And unfortunately, the current talent road system just doesn't cover that. Going in that direction, I can see a potential to make classes a lot more interesting without forcing new abilities onto the hotbar because there's a new expansion. And more importantly, the old versions of these abilities don't necessarily have to be taken away either. The social structure of WoW and the internet as a whole has changed tremendously over the past 14 years. In the beginning, one of the greatest accomplishments one would have in WoW was to be a successful raider, one of the few and the mighty who took part in tackling the game's biggest and baddest bosses. It should come to the surprise of no one that back in those days, in order to do that, you likely needed to join a guild and make a fairly long-term investment to get the attunements, the gear, and ultimately progress through the raid to meet those goals. So guilds sat on that pedestal for a time, and thanks to that came stories of glory and tragedy, nerd screams, and loot drama, politics, elitism. All of these are common critiques of guilds, and there was no shortage of them. On top of that, in hindsight, it appeared that very few players of WoW's total population even participated in raids, partially for those reasons, but also because maybe that kind of group content wasn't for everyone either. Over time, Blizzard developed a combination of systems to cover these 2 points: the perceived need to be part of a guild, and the overall participation in endgame group-based content. This led to more support for pugs, or pickup groups. These temporary partnerships to achieve a common goal worked well at a small group level, such as dungeons or questing, and not so much for Black Temple. The shift in Blizzard's focus has been undeniable, and I can cite systems like the LFD system, the Raid Finder, the pre-made group tool, and even presenting multiple difficulties to support WoW's diverse population. The point was to give more players the accessibility to play, regardless of demand, and I can't fault Blizzard for that one, because overall the gamble was successful. Endgame expanded for the less hardcore player. Meanwhile though, the guild structure has become outdated, especially with the rise of social tools like Skype and Facebook and Discord, and other tools that make communication outside of the game so much easier and affordable than it was in 2004. This whole time, WoW has pretty much been playing catch-up, attempting to keep communication in-game with Battle.net communities and the in-game WoW communities with what I've noticed to be less, it wasn't that successful. Battle.net communities are restricted by region. WoW communities are restricted by both region and faction. There's also no good way to promote communities in-game except for like a trade chat. And basically it's hard for communities to grow. Discord communities are also not searchable in-game, but they also don't share the same weaknesses that Warcraft communities do. So with a weak in-house community system but a thriving space for creating pickup groups, the people of WoW themselves responded with new tools and social structures to help make the pugging process much less haphazard, including gear score, OQ, and Raider IO. There are hurdles to joining the group that you like, with some requirements being more ridiculous than others, but they're at least easy to understand. But that aside, it really hasn't been easier to see an opportunity to join a group, but with that ease comes an arguably less meaningful investment into the group. It's a stark difference from the days of yore when it took a long time to get people together given the limited number of people on your realm. When that group finally did come together, typically there was a strong motivation for that group to stick together. Because losing someone in the middle of the run meant going back to town, spamming trade, and hoping for the best, and that's where the motivation came from. It was the fear that you would have no hope of getting the group back together. Today's group leaders have a much larger pool of players to choose between, with the only in-game filter available being item level, so consider it like a buyer's market. They're able to choose their desired class, the highest item level, and even add in other requirements like ahead of the curve for good measure. Meanwhile, those who join groups feel less guilty about leaving this given group at the first, second, or third sign that said group isn't going to work out. And let me be clear, this empowering of players to be able to group more freely, overall I think that's great. This is the figurative bed the WoW community is making with the tools that Blizzard is giving them. I'm not a big fan of analogies, but if you think of old school WoW as like the small time community, then I would think of modern WoW as the big city with the faceless pugs that you're likely only to come across once every blue moon, if ever. So in comes the drawback that makes me a little bit less enthusiastic over the freedom to sometimes act like a jerk, knowing that after this run, you're unlikely to ever see these other people again. I don't have a problem with pickup groups. After all, they are a big part of WoW's total endgame population. Every individual has their reason for not caring for one, like they don't like guilds, or guilds don't like them. They don't want to commit to a set schedule, or they don't know anyone. There's all sorts of good reasons. This kind of partnership between Blizzard and the WoW community has created this social infrastructure to help these players along despite some of the drawbacks. But I'm finding that Blizzard has taken a very hands-off approach when it comes to developing strong social communities that go beyond just progressing past that next boss. They develop Battle.net and WoW communities, which are shells of already existing systems which have stronger features. And since their launches, Blizzard has done little to nothing to help promote them. I tried looking for a few good communities, and the best that I could do was go to the WoW official forums and look at their community recruitment forum. It's pretty depressing. This doesn't indicate the state of WoW's social space as a whole, but it does demonstrate that the investment Blizzard put into communities so far is not paying off, and if it's left alone, it never will. Character growth and community. Those are two parts of the World of Warcraft that I've talked about these a lot in my time here as a content creator, and it's not something that I'm going to stop doing, and well, I'm obviously talking about them now. This rounds up part 1 of this video. In part 2, which will be coming soon, I'm going to be getting into one of these two topics. I haven't decided which one yet. And I'm going to design a whole new system around it. So I will in fact redesign all of character growth in the World of Warcraft, and that it's going to be daunting. And I'm going to tackle this idea of communities and see what can be done to improve it, because I think that there are many problems, or there are many areas that WoW can improve on. I think that these two areas make for a great start. So stay tuned for this as I give more feedback, more suggestions, and kind of my vision for what I think could help the World of Warcraft be even better. So leave a comment below, like the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe for more of this, the rest of the series, and for all things Warcraft, and I'll see you next time. Until then, stay safe, stay happy, and stay breezy.